And I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Mithat Rende, former ambassador from Turkey. He will be our moderator. And the panelists are Dr. Fatih Birol, Chief Economist of International Energy Agency. With video conference, we will connect him. Mr. Nasser Al-Jaidah, former CEO, Qatar Petroleum from Qatar. Robin Mills, CEO of Qamar Energy from United Kingdom. And Gulmira Rzayeva, Research Associate at Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, Advisor of the World Energy Council's Global Gas Center from Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Değerli katılımcılar, ekselansları, Sayın Alatiya, Katar eski Enerji Bakanı ve Başbakan Yardımcısı, değerli arkadaşlarım, hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum ve aranızda bulunmaktan duyduğum memnuniyeti ifade etmek istiyorum. Bu zirveyi gerçekleştiren Cengiz Özgencil ve ekibine, Bosphorus Summit İstişare Kurulu'na da ayrıca teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Peşinen tercüman arkadaşlara teşekkür ediyorum. Çok büyük işler yaptılar bugün de. Onlardan teknik konularda tercüme bekliyoruz. Medyanın değerli temsilcilerine de teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. If I may start, I see that the majority of the participants are not using headphones, so probably I could address the audience in English also. Your Excellency, Your Excellency, the Energy Minister, former Energy Minister, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Qatar, Mr. Abdullah bin Hamad Al Attiyah, is with us. It's an honor to have you here, sir. I had the pleasure of working with you closely when I was the ambassador of Turkey to Doha in Qatar, and when I visited you a long time ago, I had the introductory remarks about the energy in Qatar and the achievements you have reached. So it's still a good memory for me, and we learned so much from you. And thank you so much for having supported this also conference and having organized the energy sessions through you, your team. Thank you. Dear friends, I think today we should work beyond, we should talk more than beyond the oil. I suggested to the organizers that when we talk about the end of oil, we should also talk about the energy geopolitics, and especially in the region. And the reason is simple, because when we talk about the end of oil, and I'm thankful to Mr. Matsumoto, Professor Matsumoto, for having provided us with a very comprehensive presentation on the matter. I would encourage my friends and panelists to go beyond the end of oil and talk about also recent developments globally and in the region. Now, why? Because we are witnessing a global shift in the economy towards the east. We are also witnessing a global shift in the energy. The energy landscape is changing dramatically. And therefore, we should also be able to evaluate the major transformation and transition in the energy sector. Because the energy mix worldwide is shifting also towards renewables and natural gas, including, of course, liquefied natural gas, LNG. And also, we witness a major shift towards electricity, and I hope that maybe my dear friend Fatih Birol, Dr. Birol, who accepted kindly to make a short contribution to this session. He is now traveling all over the world and presenting the findings and the projections of his team under World Energy Outlook 2017. And we will have the pleasure of having him here also on the 15th of December to present also his projections about the energy, the developments in the field of energy. He agreed to make a short contribution, and we will start our dialogue and the panel discussion with his short video. But let me just highlight a few points. They were already highlighted. We have, thanks to the Qatari authorities, that we have more than one session in the field of energy, so we are studying carefully and in details the energy sector this year. So it was already repeated, but let me just remind you that the global energy targets are to have uninterrupted, affordable, environmentally sustainable, economically viable. Am I too fast for interpreters? Thank you. And essential to economic growth and social development. All is, they are the targets. And one of the targets, of course, one of the targets is low carbon economy, to switch to a low carbon economy, because otherwise it won't be, we won't have sustainable growth. And we need to fight air pollution, because it's a major problem in many countries, including India and China, and also including Turkey, because unfortunately also we are still burning coal and for heating, not only for electricity generation, and this is also a problem, and we need to also deal with this problem. So another target is to have a sound energy basket, and if you study the Turkish energy strategy that we tried to devise, formulate over the years, of course, one of our goals was to have a better energy basket for Turkey with more indigenous sources in the basket, and if possible to diversify also routes together. Well, having said this, let me also just repeat what Professor Matsumoto has already said. Fossil fuels, dear friends, will continue to dominate the energy mix until 2040 and maybe beyond. So we should expect the hydrocarbons to remain with us, and the nuclear also will remain with us, but hydrocarbon energy resources will remain with us just because we need to have the baseload capacity, maintain baseload capacity. And the Middle East will also continue to be the dominant region as regards fossil fuels, oil and natural gas in particular. So now we were engaged very much with oil prices recently. We followed with interest the rising oil prices, and also automatically, of course, the gas and LNG prices. But to a certain extent, oil prices were more on the international agenda. And why oil prices? Because of the recent developments, global developments, but also the developments in the Middle East. And let's face it, the oil prices, they had to go up to $60 or $60+. Today is about 63, I think, the Brent. And the reason is simple, because shale oil or tight oil has to be profitable. And in order to make tight oil profitable, we need to have roughly $60 per barrel oil price. And I think it has to do also, this oil price has to do with all the conflict, major conflicts in the Middle East, the recent developments, and also the Qatar diplomatic crisis. We should, dear friends, keep in mind that Qatar, one of the root causes of Qatar diplomatic crisis was the LNG and the LNG market. So fortunately, Qatar has achieved a great deal in building a huge infrastructure, an LNG infrastructure. I was told by His Excellency that they spent over $140 billion to establish this infrastructure, and their share, as was highlighted yesterday by His Excellency, is about 1/3 of the total LNG capacity, which is about 77 million tons per annum. And of course, another important element is that Qatar is producing the cheapest LNG in the world. And this is probably, this is why there was a kind of jealousy in a way, because no success goes unpunished. And then it was, in a way, created. This Qatar diplomatic crisis was artificially created so that we have seen oil prices and energy prices go up. And it is good for the shale gas lobby. It is good also for other oil-producing and exporting countries. So this is why we should, when we talk about the end of oil, we should also talk about, and maybe share our insights about the energy geopolitics and the political reasons, the political causes behind rising oil prices and LNG and the LNG sector. So I think I would like to stop here and maybe just encourage my colleagues to go beyond the oil and discuss with us also recent political developments. And now I am more than happy to let our friends share with us the short video of Dr. Birol, who very kindly accepted to make a contribution to our session. I thank you very much.
Dear Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Unfortunately, I am not with you today in my beautiful city of Istanbul, but as was suggested, I wanted to share with you two important findings of our recent study we published, World Energy Outlook. One of them is on natural gas, the other one is on the solar energy. Our report shows that the natural gas use in the world will increase without any major challenge coming from the climate concerns, from price volatility, or from government decisions. Of course, this growth will be affected by these factors, but in any case, we see in all our scenarios, use of natural gas will increase. Having said that, within the natural gas, we see a growing role of LNG, liquefied natural gas. The biggest share of the international gas trade will be coming from LNG. In addition to Qatar, we are seeing United States and Australia bringing huge amount of gas through LNG to the markets, which will redefine some of the equations in the global gas markets, ranging from the prices to contracts, from contracts to the increasing choice of importers and increasing flexibility in the markets. And we see natural gas, LNG, will not only be used in power generation, but in addition to that, more and more in the industry sector, heating and elsewhere, overall across the world, but with a growing demand coming from Asian countries. The second point I wanted to make is on solar energy. Solar is becoming the cheapest source of electricity generation in many countries. We are seeing a big growth of solar power generation in China, in India, Middle East, in Turkey, in Europe, in North America and elsewhere, because the cost of solar is coming down substantially. Only in the last 3 years, between 2014 and 17, the cost of solar is divided by 2. And we expect another halving in the next 3 years to come. The recent bids of solar in Mexico, in Abu Dhabi, in Turkey, in China, India, many countries, we see the cost of solar is coming down. So as a result of that, we see the biggest growth in new power plants is coming from solar energy, as it has been the case in the year 2016. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we see both of these two important technologies, fuels, natural gas, especially LNG, and solar power generation, they both have bright future. And I am sure in your valuable discussions today, you will be looking at these two important fuels, solar and natural gas. So once again, my best wishes to all of you in my beautiful city of Istanbul. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Birol for his contribution to our session. We are thankful to him, and we look forward to seeing him on the 15th of December when he will present the outcome of the Global Energy Outlook Report 2017. Now I have the pleasure of and honor to give the floor to my dear friend Nasser Al-Jaidah, the former CEO of Qatar Petroleum International. Sir, you have the floor, Mr. Jaidah.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, I'm honored to be here. Your Excellency Abdullah bin Hamad Al-Atiyah, I'm very thankful as well for the organizer to be given this opportunity to be before you today, especially in this lovely, great city of Istanbul, as Fatih has already said. I recall a statement by Napoleon once said, if the earth is one country, Istanbul will be its capital. So we are lucky to be here and to share with you our feeling and our basically, I'm saying, the view of what being talked about. Fatih has said it's very great news for the LNG, especially on the natural gas point of view. But let me say a few words regarding the oil side. I don't think the oil will be dead very soon. The issue of considering that the oil will be imminently coming to a peak, which has been discussed in the last decade extensively, especially from the supply point of view. As a result of that, a few years later on, the geology was much more generous, and that the supply continued to really satisfy the world demands. As a result, of course, in those days, the shale oil and the other unconventional was not really I say, in the scene. But this has been actually changed, and all of a sudden, the concept of the peak oil immediately disappeared, and people took it at rest. There is a fear in that regard, because if we feel that is really the supply will continue to be dominating, and there will not be an issue with the supply, there might be I would say, a tendency towards that we will be de-investing, but didn't happen. I think the investment has continued, especially in the unconventional. But let me state some facts. Although there are plenty of oil, as we have seen on today's on the presentation by our professor today, that we still have probably 1.6, 1.8 trillion barrel of oil of reserve. I don't know whether it's proven or is unproven, or possibly to be recovered. We consume every year almost 35 billion barrel per day, and I don't think there are in any forms that is we are able to replenish this type of reserve, or by finding giant oil fields, or even by the conventional, to be able to replace this. So the issue to take things regarding the oil and the investment side to be taken at rest could be at a risk at a certain stage, because the world still consumes 96, 97 million barrels per day. Although there is a trend for people to think that the oil demand has reached its peak, but what we have seen in the last decade or so, there was 1.1, the growth was almost 1.1% in the last 10 years. If you look at it 5 years span, it's almost 1.4. Probably at 2016, with all the drives that's been taking place in terms of tremendous increase in the EV. I think the EV went almost 40% as electrically car driven. And then we have the biofuels, then we have the conservation, then we have the environmental issue. Even with all these elements, still we had 1.6% of increase in demand. So it's really didn't really slow down the demand for oil. So oil, it is going to be there with us for a long, long time to come. I don't think it will disappear. The issue to say that we predict the oil will finish, it's unless we really define a time and how this oil will really come to an end, it will become a tautology, basically. You know, it's a talk without meanings, because the oil probably will remain for us, even if there is 60% of EV increase in cars and so on. 60% will take probably 2 million barrels per day, and it will take us from 96 or 97 to 95. But not taken into account the potential demand or the growth that goes into the various other markets. If we come to the issue of the oil will have an end to its life, yes, we know that's like maybe everything, we are all mortal, of course. But the issue, nobody knows when we're going to die and how we're going to die. You know, I mean, these are a fact. But I think the issue is today, the issue of supply. Probably my friends here, Ruben probably will tackle upon it. Will not be talked about much about the supply side, but probably the demand. But I think even in the demand side, the growth in population will be the drivers, we believe. We will have the middle class expectation in the developing countries will increase. And of course, the standard of living and cars is driven much longer. And I think still the liquid or the gasoline will play a major role in the transportation, especially in the aviations. And this will not disappear. I don't think you will be able to EV the airplane and all those, you know, type of transportation. So all in all, really, I don't see there will be either a peak in demand or really even a peak in supply. There will be I think there will be a balance and then there, and I think the oil will play a major role, although probably its overall share, because the energy share due to the population will continue to increase, will continue to be enlarged, hence other fuel which is necessary to come in, it's important to come in, because I don't think the world, the civilization that we know today, the standard of living that we have really achieved today, it can only be satisfied by the fossil fuel. But of course, I'm here also thrilled to hear that the good news, which is our Fatih has actually started today, that the natural gas will be a major player in the future, as a primary as well as a transit fuel in the future, because the natural gas is being liked, it's because it's efficient, environmentally more friendly, and so on. And of course, as Qatar, from Qatar point of view, because I think His Excellency asked me to speak about Qatar briefly, if I could just mention, because I don't want to have to take all the time. because we are oil short and long in gas, and everybody knows this, it's a fact, Qatar today is make up for 1/3 of the LNG trade worldwide. Qatar LNG is almost reaching almost all continents, have played and proven since the last 20 years as the most reliable supplier in this domain. For that reason, Qatar is also, we control almost 1/3, or we have the market share of 1/3 of this world, of the LNG. But we are realizing as well the fact that there are major players to come in. The United States will come in, and also the Australian LNG industry is booming. Together with this, of course, Qatar being not only a major producer, Qatar is thinking of the future as a major gas player. With that I say, because Qatar today owns the infrastructure, both internally and externally, even outside, owning hubs and owning, of course, terminals around the world, together with the transportation that we have invested heavily, that we are able to move gas across the globe. And on top of that, of course, we are going to probably, if we continue our position as it is today, our market share probably will drop to 15% in the next probably 5 to 10 years. And that is one lot we are working hard in order to maintain that share and even beyond, because Qatar Petroleum have decided really to increase the production from the famous 77 million ton to 100 million ton per annum, which will happen in the next 4 to 5 years, which is also will maintain that particular, that specific share of the gas.
Thank you.
So that's very, very, very important. On top of this, if you just give me one second. On top of this, of course, Qatar investing heavily in also outside the United States. We will invest in order for us to create a hub outside Qatar, like the United States, as well as in Africa and somewhere else. So with this, I'd like to conclude, and if there is any other question, I'll be happy to answer later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jaidah. I totally agree with you that oil will remain with us for the decades to come. But as Fatih Birol put it, I think the role of oil will diminish, and we should expect a major increase in the share of renewables. And Mr. Birol said that the solar is becoming less expensive or affordable. We should expect the solar to have a good share, because just keep in mind that last year 100,000 megawatt of solar capacity was built, and China had 42,000 megawatt of it. So China will play a global role in the field of energy, and with the affordable prices in renewables, we should expect the share of renewables to increase. But natural gas will be also on the rise, and especially the LNG, because it is considered to be an intermediate energy resource. In fighting climate change and air pollution, it's quite important. So whether natural gas will continue to be an intermediate energy resource, or its role will decline, it remains to be seen, maybe in the future. But we should expect Qatar to play its leading role in the field of LNG. And now may I give the floor to Ms. Gulmira Rzayeva to share with us her insights. And I would appreciate very much that I am told that we have 30 minutes left, so if you could kindly, and I would like to listen also to Mr. Mills, so I would like you to speak for about 8 minutes each, and then we might have just another chance to have maybe questions and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rende. It's also a great pleasure and privilege to be here today. Well, I will try to be brief. As we heard today, of course, the answer to the question of the panel is it's not the end of oil age, and for the reasons that we have already heard, because at least 3 decades from into future from now, we will see oil, although decreasing in demand, oil as one of the main fossil fuel in energy consumption. But I think in order to to be able to analyze the future of fossil fuels, including oil, we need to look at the country's choice, those countries' choice which could reshape the global outlook. And those countries obviously are the countries which are consuming fossil fuels and including oil the most, and the biggest consumer of oil, it's China. So if look at the China's, China's not only consumption but also production, then we can see that the China's gas production this year, and probably this will continue in the following years, is steeply falling. And the reason is that China's cutting back its investments in drilling developments due to owing the lower international prices. And this trend, actually, this reflects the trend worldwide in the back of these low oil prices in many countries, because it doesn't make sense to invest in new projects, upstream projects, with the prices below 50 or even below $60 as the prices are now. So some of the fields worldwide, they are played out and not worth investing in beyond just keeping them in working order. And this is the case mainly in China. That's why the production will be steeply falling in this country. So this means that China will be importing oil, more oil in the future. But this is not the case in some other regions in the world. And as an example, we can bring the FSU countries, the former Soviet Union countries. The country where I'm coming from, Azerbaijan, is contrary to this trend, is increasing its investment in oil production in the country. You may heard that this contract of the century, which was signed in '94, was extended till 2050, and the biggest oil field in the Caspian Sea, the Azeri-Chirag-Guneshli field, was extended till 2050, and it's expected that around 40 million ton of oil will be produced till 2050. So $40 billion of investment will be done in this field during these few decades, and oil production will be increased in the country. So I think this is the case also in some other former Soviet countries, including Kazakhstan. We can bring as an example the Kashagan field and some other fields in Russia, for instance. So this is what related to oil. Well, with gas, the situation is different, and we heard about this today as well. We are, as a gas producing country, gas exporting country, also investing and materializing the multi-billion project in Azerbaijan, which called the Southern Gas Corridor, which is designed to bring gas from the biggest Caspian gas field called Shah Deniz to both Turkey and Europe. Azerbaijan will be first country in the Caspian Sea that will export gas to the European Union, of course beyond Russia. And this will start in 2020 with the 10 BCM of gas and from 2018 with 6 BCM of gas to Turkey. Well, despite this challenging time in terms of a low price environment, it seems that the financing of this multi-billion project is not an issue. Many international banks and international financial institutions have already agreed or already issued long-term loans and credits to this project. So it's moving ahead, even it's ahead of the schedule. But another question is the market where this gas will flow, both the Turkish and the European market. You know, there are some profound changes in both markets, especially in the Turkish market, because what we are witnessing in the last few years in Turkey is that demand is declining. And this is probably not a good news for oil producing and oil exporting countries to this country. And demand is declining for a number of reasons. And first of all, it's because of the government new energy policy, which is designed to decrease the gas reliance, gas dependence on external exporters, including Russia. And the government introduced a support scheme to locally produced energy resources, which is obviously renewables, coal, lignite, etc. So this has its tremendous effect on demand. Last year decline was around 5.6%, and this trend will be continued. Well, till 2030, we had a report published at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in April this year, and our projection is that by 2030 the demand will be growing in Turkey only from current 47 BCM to only 55, 56 BCM. Another change is that Turkey's gas supply is also changing, and Turkey is tremendously increasing its gas downstream infrastructure, gas entry point capacities. Turkey is doubling this gas entry point capacity, and this will give Turkey more flexibility and more choices to import gas from new and alternative sources, including LNG, FSRU, and even from pipeline. So obviously this will strengthen Turkey's hand in negotiations of new gas supply contracts, especially in the 2020s, when Turkey's long-term gas supply contracts are due to expire, with all its current pipeline suppliers, including Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. So in the back of all these changes in the market, well, good and bad, I think the gas supplier companies and countries, including Azerbaijan and the Shah Deniz Gas Consortium, should take all these changes into account. And Europe, I won't stop here long, but there are more competitions nowadays in the European market as well, so a new suppliers needs to face the competition coming from not only traditional pipeline suppliers, but also a new suppliers such as US LNG, or maybe LNG in the future coming from Australia and others. So these are the challenging time for these new gas producers and suppliers, and I think there are some interesting times to watch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Gulmira. Thank you very much. I had the honor to work with you and your colleagues in the past, and we are thankful to the Azeri authorities for having established major infrastructure together with us and with other neighboring countries, the gas corridor, which is the fourth artery to Europe. So my question to you, in fact, is that you have covered also Turkey's efforts to improve its infrastructure and storage capacities, and also to have new reception facilities, LNG facilities. In fact, it's very important for us to have to improve our storage capacity and in order to improve our demand flexibility in under duress, especially in bad times. So do you believe that in this context that Turkey is capable of becoming an energy, and especially natural gas, trading and pricing hub? Because this is our effort now. The Turkish government is working hard to introduce new legislation, progressive legislation, to liberalize the Turkish market, and also to complete its energy infrastructure, including TANAP and other pipelines, including probably Bulgarian-Turkish interconnector and so on. Do you believe that Turkey is in a position in the years to come to become an energy, natural gas pricing hub and trading hub? This is my question. And maybe I would appreciate it if other friends also could, in their presentations, also could also cover this question. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Turkey is doing a tremendous job in diversification of its supply sources. And I think the Turkish government new energy policy, well, new because this energy policy actually was introduced after the new Minister of Energy took the office. I think we can, to understand the new policy that currently is being implemented, it can be divided into 3 stages. The first stage involved is the decreasing Turkey's energy dependence on current suppliers, as I said, including Russia, because around Turkey depends on 54% of gas imports from Russia. The second stage is to shift an energy sector based on generation alone to energy industry sector, and this is, as the minister called it in one of his speeches, national energy and strategy mining policy. So Turkey is trying to nationalize the whole energy sector, and of course this will give Turkey also a chance to diversify its supply sources, because Turkey's entry point capacity is being doubled, and it's currently 260 million cubic meter per day, and by 2023 it will be around 473 million cubic meter per day. So this means that, well, this includes all the downstream infrastructure, including LNG, FSRU, 2 new pipeline projects, TANAP and South Stream, as well as storages. So this will give Turkey a great flexibility, not only to import more gas, including more LNG, and to store more gas during demand fluctuations, seasonal demand fluctuations, because it's great in Turkey. It has a great difference of demand during the cold times and summertime. So, but also Turkey, as a third stage of this policy, Turkey can become a kind of natural gas trading center, because one of the aim of Turkey is being able to export the excess of gas which will be available in the country as a result of implementation of these policies and the implementation of stage 1 and stage 2. So Turkey will have some excess of gas. And the third stage and aim is to export this gas to the neighboring countries, the neighboring European countries. I think here we need to specifically mention the 2 new pipeline projects, TANAP and South Stream, which both will be the only pipeline projects that will add to entry point capacity expansion in Turkey. It will tremendously increase this the pipeline capacity of Turkey. So Turkey will be able to not only import gas from some other sources through, for instance, TANAP, which could be Turkmenistan in the future, or Iraq, or gas from ISMED. Of course, I think these options are a bit remote from realization, looking at them from at this stage. But this is an opportunity that Turkey has with TANAP project, because it's a quite scalable project. And the South Stream, which also could bring additional...
Turk Stream, you need to say Turk Stream now, the new name. Turk Stream.
That's right. Turk Stream, which also can bring some additional volumes of not only Russian gas, but also, given the scalability of this project, gas from other sources.
Yeah, please, could you wind it up if you... Is it okay? Thank you very much for your contribution. Mr. Robin Mills is the CEO of Qamar Energy from United Kingdom. Thank you for your contribution, sir, in advance.
So when I saw the title of the session on the end of the age of oil, I reflected on the way this debate has gone over the past few years. If you go back a few years, of course, everyone was worried about the end of oil because we were going to run out of supply. In the past couple of years, that debate has changed, and people have been starting to worry, perhaps within the industry and within major oil producers, about whether we're going to run out of demand. Now, I think, as I wrote back in 2008, when the oil price was reaching its peak, that there was no danger of running out of supply, that oil supply and oil resources were extremely abundant. I think the current debate over the end of demand perhaps has a bit more justice to it, but still is overplayed in many areas, and I'll explain why in a moment. When we think about the end of the problem of peak oil as a problem of supply, I think it was always clear that oil resources globally are extremely abundant, and at the right price and with the right technology, all of those resources would come to market. In the end, it's been US shale oil that has really been driving global demand, satisfying global demand and driving prices down. But it could have been something else. If prices had remained high and shale oil had not developed in the way it has, we would have seen more development of the Canadian oil sands, we would have seen more development of deep water, we would have seen more enhanced oil recovery, and we would have seen more growth from the OPEC countries, from Iran and Iraq and some of the others. So shale, yes, has brought down prices more quickly than we might have expected, but something was going to meet that demand when prices were as high as they were back in 2008, and then in between 2011 and 2013 when we were over $100 a barrel consistently. So now the debate has changed to, are we going to run out of demand? And I think this is driven by maybe two camps of viewpoint, and the one camp is kind of the techno-optimists or the futurists who think that oil is going to be replaced by dramatically new technologies, and the obvious one is going to be electric vehicles and possibly self-driving electric vehicles. And then the other camp, and of course these two combine to an extent, the other camp that believes in the end of oil demand is the group that is looking for climate change solutions and sees the amount of greenhouse gases and CO2 produced by burning oil, and quite rightly sees that's a serious problem, and again sees other technologies, and particularly electric vehicles, as a solution to that. Now, I think there's no question that electric vehicles have made a great advance in recent years, and they're getting to the point that they could be quite a viable alternative for kind of light transport at least. I think there are still some challenges to replacing oil in many other uses in the economy. If we think back through history about the way that oil has been used in the economy, oil started out as a fuel for lighting. If you go back to the 19th century, it was used in lanterns, and kerosene was used to create light. That was replaced by electricity. Oil was used later on as a fuel for power generation, and up into the 60s and the 70s, oil was a very important power generation fuel. Now, when the oil crisis of the 70s came along and the oil price went up very high, oil became simply non-viable as a fuel for power generation, except in a few countries in the Middle East that still use it today. But around the world, it's hardly used for power generation now. It's been replaced by gas, by coal, by nuclear power, and more recently by renewable energy. So oil has really been pushed back into its kind of core uses today, which is really transport and petrochemicals. Transport meaning light vehicles, passenger cars, heavy vehicles, trucks, buses, and so on. Shipping, aviation, and then petrochemicals. So how easily can we replace oil in these sectors? Well, light vehicles, light passenger cars. We know how popular Tesla has become as the trailblazer for that. But all the major car companies have electric models out and are trying to push those forward. certainly getting better, ranges are getting better, costs are coming down, charging infrastructure is getting better. They're still, in most markets, pretty heavily dependent on subsidies, and you see in some countries which have reduced their subsidies for electric vehicles, sales have dropped off very dramatically. So still, they're not quite there, I'd say, as a mass market solution. Although probably in the next decade or two, they will be increasingly popular on their own merits. Heavy transport, again, you've probably seen Elon Musk's latest venture unveiling this heavy truck, battery-powered truck. Interesting, but I think so far, and what I understand even from the views of truckers themselves, something that's not really a kind of viable solution now, except perhaps in some kind of niche markets. One thing that struck me is that one trucker said, when I fill up my semi and I'm pumping diesel into it, that's the equivalent, if you do the calculation, of about 50 megawatts of electricity going into that tank. Now you think about trying to charge a truck with 50 megawatts, which is probably the demand of a small town, and you think about hundreds of trucks trying to fill up at the same time. You realise the kind of the scale of the electrical infrastructure that's required to charge these things and the stress they would put on the grid. Trucks obviously drive very long distances, have to refuel frequently. The weight of the batteries in a truck to cover these distances is enormous. So electric trucking, outside maybe short range stuff and simple shuttle journeys backwards and forwards on a short journey, still a long way to go. Shipping, no real prospect of electrifying shipping, except over very short kind of ferry routes and so on. Long range shipping will continue to depend on oil or possibly on alternative fuels, and liquefied natural gas is attracting interest as a fuel for shipping, but still only making inroads slowly. The shipping industry is conservative, has a lot of turnover of its fleet to do if it were going to adopt LNG large scale as a fuel. And then aviation, where there's no real substitute to oil fuels for flying, simply because of their energy density, of course. Again, a plane, unless a very small specialist kind of plane, but a serious passenger or cargo plane, needs the energy density at the moment that only oil-based fuels can supply. So all of those markets are going to be very hard to replace. I think we also need to bear in mind the role of price in this. We've seen that when oil prices are high, demand growth is very weak, not surprisingly, and alternative technologies are much more viable. When oil prices are low, demand recovers. In 2015, we saw exceptional global demand growth. In 2017, we've seen very strong demand growth as well, something like 1.8 million barrels per day of demand growth around the world. And it's pretty interesting, we're getting such high demand growth, and yet we're worrying about the end of demand. I'd say there's a certain contradiction there. And if we look at the forecasts by major agencies and companies, when is oil demand going to reach a peak and start declining? Some maybe will say the mid-2020s, some will say the 2040s, some will say never, or at least we don't know when, sometime in the indefinite future. So there are obviously major uncertainties here. I think we should be prepared not to be surprised by technology, and technology can, as we know, can advance faster than we perhaps expected. But the idea of replacing oil from the transport system in particular is a very major challenge, one that is not going to happen overnight. However, I think it's clear, if the default prices do stay at current levels or perhaps increase somewhat, the current surge in demand growth will slow down again. And OPEC countries in particular have to be prepared for a future in which oil demand does grow, but relatively slowly. And OPEC's own World Oil Outlook released recently does show this, a world in which oil demand is growing fairly slowly, and there's a lot of competition over market share, a lot of competition within OPEC countries and then between OPEC and Russia and US shale producers and others. I think that's more the future that major oil producers have to plan for, not one of diminishing demand, at least not for some considerable time, but one in which demand is growing fairly slowly, in which there is intense competition for market share, and there's a real premium, therefore, on being very competitive, but also on diversifying their economies beyond just relying on the production and export of oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. As regards to electrical cars, you rightly highlighted the importance of electrical cars. According to International Energy Agency's projections, by 2040, globally, we will have 150 million electrical cars. Today, the figure is only 2 million. And it's very important, in fact, to fight climate change and air pollution and so on. So it's important for sustained growth. But also, you rightly said that oil will remain with us because of the heavy transport, and especially in India and China, it is a big problem. And it is basically, they are so dependent on, especially in the field of trucking, on oil and petrol, and also in shipping and aviation. So given this situation, do you expect, if we are to go beyond 150 million electrical cars globally, do you think that the share of oil will diminish and the renewables and the natural gas, especially LNG, will continue to be on the rise? Thank you.
Well, you know, I looked at OPEC's latest World Oil Outlook, and it's pretty interesting. Last year, they had by 2040 about 40 million electric vehicles worldwide, which is not very much in such a big global vehicle fleet. But in this year's edition, they had something like 250 million. So just in the space of 1 year, they increased their estimate by 6 times. However, that is still only about 1%, about 10% of the global vehicle fleet by 2040. So yes, okay, so 10% of demand from that vehicle fleet has gone to electric vehicles. Still 90% is left, and that's 90% of a much bigger overall global vehicle fleet. So yes, it eats away at oil demand at the margins, but if you believe those projections, it's not causing a crash in oil demand, and oil still remains the dominant fuel, you know, in that view, even for the light vehicles, never mind for the heavy ones.
Thank you very much, Professor Matsumoto. May I just give you the floor for a minute or two if you have any additional comments to make, given the statements and contributions made by our friends? Thank you.
Yes. First, you know, regarding geopolitics issue, that I first thank Qatar government to help the Japanese people that when we had an emergency need for the gas after the Fukushima incident. So we are grateful. And this is, you know, other type of geopolitical event that now also that I was kind of surprised that Qatar played very cool in this blockade issue that and we didn't see much impact on the LNG market after the the crisis. So that was I think it's very good the diplomatic reaction from Qatar side. So I was appreciate that from consumer side. Regarding electric vehicle, I agree with Robin's point that even if it's increased a lot, it's still small share. That's also true with the renewable generation. And the other thing we have to think about the climate change is that if you generate electricity using coal, it's not helping. You're driving electric vehicle, you feel that you're using clean technology, but think about how it's generated. If it's generated from coal with a lot of CO2 emitted, it's not really clean technology. So what matters is what is primary generation. So that's why it's important thinking a little bit one step ahead of the source. So I think everybody agree in the sense that the oil demand is gonna increase and oil supply is gonna increase as in a 30, 40 years horizon. So I think it was indeed that what I said is consensus view. That's why I'm very glad to see that other speakers said.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have a few minutes for questions from the floor or very short comments or remarks. Your Excellency, we thank you very much for being with us. Some commentators argued that with respect to your global role in the field of energy, that you represent 1/3 of the LNG trade. When you decided and your energy minister went on the 2nd of April to the Tokyo Energy Conference, and there he declared that you decided to lift unilaterally, or to lift especially the unilaterally declared moratorium on developing the North Field gas fields to make additional developments and to produce 20 BCM per annum more than what you are producing today, that was argued that to be the last straw which broke the camel's back, and that it was considered to be an alarming decision by certain circles that you are going to hit hard on the prices of LNG, which was not good for shale LNG. So do you think that it was a right conclusion that your decision to lift the moratorium, unilateral moratorium that you declared 12 years ago, was really a game changer as regards LNG prices, or was it exaggerated? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You know why we introduced the moratorium at that time, because we were not yet have more information, fully information about the reservoir, about the huge gas field, even though the gas field is 6,000 kilometers and is not homogenized. So when we reach that's 77 million tons, including the GTL, including other industrials as fertilizer, methanol, aluminum, steel, and so we say let's to slow down to be sure that we are not going to damage the reservoir. Because we are a country, we are not a company. Company that don't care, they maximize the production. When it's finished, they will say to you, goodbye, Charlie. But we are a country, we have to very carefully to be how to extend the life of the field for, as much time as, we would like to see. When the reservoir, and we would like to thank, QB engineers, our reservoir engineers, even supporting by Shell, by ExxonMobil, by our all big partners, who support us also technically with a lot of reservoir, a lot of stimulation, and then they prove that we can produce more, avoiding the damaging what the expectation. So when we be sure that the QB declare it, that they will produce, they can produce more quantities. So now they also announced that they can reach 100 million tons by the coming 5 years. It's a kind of challenge, we are knowing that the market, how to react. In LNG, technically, you have to find customers first, and then you will produce the LNG. So now we see is more countries coming to be an LNG consumers. As you know, Qatar signed a big contract with Pakistan, 5 million tons. Just last month, we signed also a contract with Bangladesh, 2.5 million tons. We have also a lot of markets in the Middle East is coming. And also, there are with a discussion with Sri Lanka, Philippines, and others. So I believe, also what I mentioned yesterday, that we will convert our terminal in USA with our partner ExxonMobil because we built a big terminal in Texas to import gas from LNG from Qatar. But shale gas changed the whole pictures. So the price of LNG dropped from $14 to $3. So we stopped. We never sent one cargo, but the terminal was completed. Now we will convert it to export LNG from USA. So we believe that ExxonMobil and QB, they will, if everything's go correctly, by 2023, I think they will start to produce the first quantity. So the market is a big challenge. Whatever we talk about electrical, whatever I talk I agree with Mr. Mill that there are a lot of, issues that the world needs mixed energy, for sure. Even solar, what Mr. Fatih Birol said, is a good news for Qatar. Because also we are very concerned about what after oil and gas. Oil and gas is a depleted resource. Even if it takes us 100, 150 years as compared with our reservoir, but we need the solar electricity because this is our next step. So we all, work together. We will all, see how the world needs energy, whatever the energy it comes from, but the world will never independence in one single resource or one, single, production from whatever, thermal, electrical, solar, gas, oil. The whole world needs the whole kind of, energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for sharing your insights with us. It's a very important topic. And also, just because you heavily invested with ExxonMobil in Texas, that now they are able also to reverse the pipelines and also to become net LNG exporters by 2020. And I understand that the United States also, if all goes well, will be also energy sufficient by 2035. So it's all good news. We thank you very much. And I thank also my friends and all the panelists and for all of you for having listened to us and for your patience. We thank you very much. I hope that you benefited from this session. We went beyond oil and we discussed gas and all other energy resources. I thought that it was quite appropriate. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Dr. Abdullah bin Hamad Al-Attiyah, Chairman, Abdullah bin Hamad Al-Attiyah Foundation for Energy and Sustainable Development, former Deputy Prime Minister and former Minister of Energy and Industry, and Mr. Cengiz Özgencil, the founder of ICP, to deliver the award to our speakers. Thank you. Thanks to all our speakers. And we pass to our next